This is Two-Way Tonight. My name is Mark Halperin, and this room is less cluttered than last night. Many of you sent me messages about how cluttered the room was last night. Well, I'm in a different place. I'm kind of on home base. Thank you for joining. I will tell you what happened today, and then we'll talk about it. If you'd like to be in on the conversation and you're here on the Two-Way platform, please raise the yellow hand, the E hand. And if you've never raised your hand before, today's the day. Please get in on the conversation. Whether you raise your hand and talk, or whether you go into chat on X or YouTube, our watchwords here, our bylaws, our North Stars, our foundations, peace, love, and understanding. They're not just words, they're a way of life. Also, the presumption of grace of all to all. Please, if you hear people on the show you don't agree with, use it as a learning opportunity rather as an opportunity to boycott the program. Very happy that you're here. We're having a great week on this platform. I feel like lots is going on, and we're talking about it in a way which is consistent with what we try to do here. Have different kinds of conversations, and you can hear other places. More authentic, less posturing, longer. We hope more sophisticated, at least at times, and trying to focus on like letting all voices be heard. And a lot of what we've talked about this week is the media, and we'll talk again about the media today. What a complicated situation this is, where you've got, on the one hand, the legacy of bias and the First Amendment, and the dangerous precedent that could be set if White Houses feel with impunity they can cut people off based on their reporting. As we've said, Democratic White Houses do that too. And so the umbrage and high dudgeon of the White House Correspondents Association was not matched during the many, many times in the Biden administration when they, based on the content of reporting, denied access. So we'll talk about that. And we've got two great guests. Eleanor Clift, longtime journalist. I hope she considers it phrase to say she's been a longtime fixture of Washington journalism, and Amber Duke of the Daily Caller. They'll join us in a moment after I run through a little bit of today's news, and then, of course, we'll want your questions. Extraordinary moment today at the White House. I've never seen anything quite like it, and that's been true of much of what's occurred during the Trump administration. Cabinet meeting, as we say here at Two-Way, like no other. Plenty of cabinet meetings where the president talks and some other people talk, but this one went on a long time, and it was just a Trump show. And the press pool was larger than it normally is, because not only have they added different organizations to the existing ones, but you also had a Fox News anchor who was around the White House today let in. And I kind of predicted it this morning. I talked about how if Sean and I were in the White House and we asked to be let into a pooled event, they probably would let us in. And we could join in the conversation and join in the questioning. But the president let most every reporter in the pool, in the expanded pool, ask multiple questions. So it went on for quite some time. And that was extraordinary. And the way the president kind of directed the thing. But most extraordinary was Musk. As we kind of predicted on the show this morning, Musk was allowed to talk after the president. And he talked at great length. And after he talked at some length, and I'll get into a moment what he said, how he said it, then the president basically said, all right, now Elon will have a press conference here in front of the cabinet. And I think some members of the cabinet thought that was delightful. And I think some members of the cabinet, based on reading their visages, felt like it was a bit of an insult that Elon Musk was being treated like the prime minister or the CEO or whatever, however you want to describe it. But he got a lot of time. And my read of his tone and of his way he spoke and then answered questions was he does recognize that he's got a problem with some members of the cabinet who don't think they work for Elon Musk, and particularly on some of these cuts, not particularly pleased with how he's done things, even though he's been warned to play more nicely with others. And again today, he went out of his way to say he was tech support. His T-shirt said tech support. He dressed in his normal style, which again, maybe that's happened in American history, where someone shows up and gives a prominent role at a cabinet meeting dressed in a T-shirt and a baseball cap, but I doubt it. And said he was from tech support, said it was the greatest cabinet in American history. Not sure how he's measuring that, but and was very deferential to the cabinet. In some ways, But in other ways, he talked up a blue streak and didn't seem to mind being the center of attention. He got a bunch of questions on a bunch of topics, as did the president. And I'll run through what some of that was. But he also, at one point, a reporter asked the president which department has been the best in responding to Doge. And then the reporter said to Musk, which has been the worst? And the president went out of his way to protect Musk from having to answer. And in general, if you were looking at Trump's body language, his tone, his word choice, the fact that he called on Musk and let Musk talk at length in the beginning, you'd have to say today was a day in which Donald Trump was trying to give Musk a vote of confidence, not to undermine him. Now, he also said that Doge is coming to the cabinet departments, that each cabinet secretary, as they've been confirmed for the most part, and they're in place, and some of their deputies are in place. He said they're all going to do their own version of Doge. They're all going to scrutinize how money is spent. And then the head of the OMB said today, more layoffs are coming, mass layoffs. And Elon was back to saying they're going to save $1 trillion or $2 trillion. They also talked about this concept of gold cards, gold green cards, of selling a path to citizenship for $5 million. And they did the math, more conservative math from the Commerce Secretary, very aggressive math from the president about how many of these they might sell. The president said, maybe we'll sell 1 million of them. And I haven't had time to do this, and maybe somebody down here will raise their hand and tell me, this seems like a great idea. And I've not heard any Democrats trash it. Seems like a great idea because, as the president said, we're selling something that no other country can sell. Other countries provide incentives to recruit skilled people, athletes, good business people, engineers. But we're literally the only country in the world that would have the audacity and the capacity. That's my Jesse Jackson imitation. The audacity and the capacity to say, you want to come to the United States, you can be a citizen. We have to pass a background check and give us $5 million. But if 1 million people pay $5 million, as the president said today correctly, that's real money. So that's a very intriguing thing that came up. All right, now let's go back to the cabinet meeting. Okay, Elon Musk, as I said, deferential. I recommend, if you're interested, as most of you probably are because you watch this show, if you're interested in understanding the Musk-Trump relationship, if you're interested in understanding Musk's way of dealing with his current status and some of the other big issues in front of the administration, you should go on C-SPAN or somewhere and watch the entire thing. We're going to show you some. So here's Musk talking about how great the cabinet is. Number 4, please.
President Trump has put together, I think, the best cabinet ever. Literally. So, I do not give false praise. This is an incredible group of people. I don't think that such a talented team has actually ever been assembled. I think it's literally the best cabinet that the country has ever had, and I think the company should be incredibly appreciative of the people in this room.
So some of the cabinet secretaries, as Musk talked, and again, he talked at length, some of them seemed delighted and appreciative. Some of them less so, and you saw a little bit there in the cutaways. Not all the cabinet members, I think, seemed to be delighted that Musk was given such a prominent role. Do we have the clapping video, or are we still working on that?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So at one point, the reporter asked, what does the cabinet think of Musk? And the Secretary of Commerce Lutnick, I believe, led a round of applause to basically, rather than answering in a negative way, suggest we love Musk. Musk is awesome. So here's the thing, and watch Secretary of State Rubio, who's seated next to the president, and watch his posture towards clapping for Musk as compared to some of his colleagues. Roll tape, please.
The President Trump put out a Truth Social today saying that everybody in the cabinet was happy with you. I just wondered if you had heard otherwise, and if you had heard anything about members of the cabinet who weren't happy with the way things were going, and if so, what are you doing to address those any dissatisfaction?
Good question. Good question.
Hey, Elon, let the cabinet speak just for a second.
Exactly.
Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, we'll throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy? They have a lot of respect for Elon, and that he's doing.
All right, as I like to say, play it again,
Disagree a
Sam.
little bit, but I will
Re-rack
tell
that,
you,
play it
for the
again.
most
Again,
part, I think everyone's.
watch
everyone's-
Hegseth, watch Lutnick, re-rack it, play it again. Watch Hegseth and Lutnick, who are to the president's left, and then watch Rubio. If you can play, just start in that clap. So if you can scroll to that, that'd be great, but not very long.
Start around 30 seconds.
Yeah, there we go. Now, so watch. Here's Lutnick. Watch Lutnick on the screen right here, and then watch Rubio and watch him look around and see. Do I need to clap? Go ahead.
They have a lot of respect for Elon. And
Yeah.
that he's
Now,
doing this.
Bobby,
Some
as he's
disagree
called,
a
didn't
little
clap
bit, but I
particularly
will tell you,
very
for the
much
most
too,
part,
but
I think everyone's
Rubio
not
is
only happy,
reported to
but
be
so go ahead.
someone who's not particularly thrilled with what Doge has done, and that email last week
The best.
telling everybody, Sam, you can kill this, telling everybody to send in the 5 things they did the previous week. And the president referenced Rubio and said, State Department's complicated. They're doing sensitive things, and so it's understandable that maybe not every State Department employee would send back the 5 things they did the previous week. But I will say again, although today clearly, if you take the president's treatment of Musk, it was an effort to buttress his support. It's clear that some members of the cabinet, and I'd put Rubio on that list, are not super excited about the way Doge is going and think they should be in charge of their own departments, not just because of territorial issues, but because they can't govern these departments with bad morale. And it's an undercovered topic, which is all these cabinet secretaries who come in and they're part of Doge and they're part of changing things, but they have to manage their employees. And anybody on here who's ever worked in a management position where there are layoffs knows it's a very different challenge, a big management challenge, to deal with the people who are going and to deal with the people who are staying or might be staying. And so to come into a new job, like Marco Rubio never run the State Department before, and to be faced with low morale, concern, resignations, firings, it's not ideal. And he's trying to be Secretary of State. He doesn't want to be the head of HR of the State Department. And so my guess is that I know, I'm not guessing. He's amongst those cabinet secretaries, and you saw it on vivid display there with his slow singular golf claps as opposed to rapturous applause. He's amongst those who don't think Musk is necessarily on net a force for good. Again, the president made it clear today, at least for today, how he feels. All right, there was lots of other stuff covered at the cabinet meeting. But here's Donald Trump. This is going to be number 3, Sam. Donald Trump talking about the failure of some federal employees to reply to the Musk-generated "Tell me 5 things you did last week" email.
To add that those million people that haven't responded, though, Elon, they are on the bubble. You know, I wouldn't say that we're thrilled about it. You know, they haven't responded. Now, maybe they don't exist. Maybe we're paying people that don't exist. Don't forget, we just got here. This group just got here. But those people are on the bubble, as they say. You know, maybe they're going to be gone. Maybe they're not around. Maybe they have other jobs. Maybe they moved and they're not where they're supposed to be. A lot of things could have happened. I wouldn't say that Biden ran a very tight administration. They spent money like nobody's ever spent money before. Wasted money. The Green New scam, all of the different things they spent money on. And you've seen that. You've seen that with some of the things that I read in speeches. I read them and people can't believe when I read them. 20 million here, 30 million here. For,
all right, we can get out of this.
You know, a little
again, lots covered during the cabinet meeting press conference. Told you about the Elon stuff. Showed a little bit more there. Told you about the president talking about the green card, the gold cards. Here's another topic covered. The president confirmed that President Zelensky is coming to the United States on Friday for this signing ceremony. And I would say, we'll play a bit of it here, number 2, Sam, in a moment. This was the most favorable the president has talked about Ukraine in a while, about the partnership and about, even though the U.S. is not going to be putting American forces on the ground, that because we'll be in business with the Ukrainians and have American presence there dealing with the rare earth material, that he basically said Russia's not going to attack Ukraine because they're not going to mess with the United States. So here's a little bit of Donald Trump talking about the Ukraine and the deal. Number 2, please.
Equipment that would have been over very quickly.
What concessions would you like to see? What concessions would you like to see?
Oh, I don't want to tell right now, but I can tell you that NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started. And I think, JD, we can say that. Do you have a statement on that? You've been very much involved. I gave him the beauty.
Great. Maybe the hardest question, sir. I mean, look, as the president said, we're not going to do the negotiation in public with the American media. He's going to do it in private with the president of Russia, with the president of Ukraine, and with other leaders. And I think that's how this has to go. I think that.
I'll say again, he was more positive about Ukraine elsewhere in the session. I can't say it enough, and you don't read this very much in the press. The vice president is so influential. He's so influential. All right, a few more things. There was a flurry of tweets today, ostensibly showing a Don Jr. This is number 5, Sam. Ostensibly with audio of Don Jr. saying we should have armed Russia, we shouldn't have armed Ukraine. And the DNC retweeted it, and a bunch of people, prominent people on the left did. It was fake. It was an AI-generated fake that got sent around a lot. Now, there are MAGA people saying, how dare the DNC? They shouldn't have done it. They shouldn't have. You shouldn't be retweeting stuff that could be fake. But I think so far we've gotten off easy, because I thought there'd be more of this during the campaign, and there wasn't. This was a very credible fake, and there's outrage amongst Don Jr. and his folks. But I just tell everybody, don't retweet something like that if you don't know it's authentic. It's that simple. And there's going to be more about this. Trust me, coming up. Okay. The owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, made an announcement today that has really shaken up the Washington Post. And it's, those of you know who follow the Washington Post, a lot of turmoil there already, a lot of resignations, a lot of concern about Bezos not endorsing the paper not endorsing Kamala Harris. The editorial page editor, the opinion editor of the Washington Post, David Shipley, who's a longtime friend of mine, a wonderful man, and despite what some people on the right are saying, not a crazy liberal, not a liberal, like a hardcore liberal. He quit because Bezos said the paper now is not going to write editorials that aren't in sync with two principles: in liberty and free markets. Okay. He said, we'll write about other topics, but we're not going to write editorials that run counter to those two important principles. And it's a strange thing for an owner to say, but I will tell you, and I have a lot of feelings about it, in part because it involved the resignation of someone I'm quite fond of. Liberals are giving up a lot now that they've considered to be theirs, not just since the election, but a lot since the election. They considered to be theirs that their rich donors, including their Jewish American donors, would write them checks no matter how much the donors objected to university policies on things like Palestine and Israel. They took for granted that the university money would still come in. They took for granted that corporate CEOs would support DEI policies and cater in every respect to their woke employees of whom they were afraid. They took for granted that they could control the Kennedy Center. They took for granted that editorial boards of our major newspapers would almost all be extremely liberal. They took that all for granted. And now you have at the LA Times and the Washington Post billionaire owners who say, we don't want to just have editorial boards that are liberal. It's okay to have some liberal positions, maybe columnists, maybe amongst those on the editorial board, but we don't want to have an editorial board that's just liberal. And this is very unsettling to a lot of people who, again, have taken for granted that in American society, certain of our institutions were just going to be liberal. And one of the Washington Post's best reporters, who writes about economics, tweeted after his boss, Jeff Bezos, promulgated this policy. He said, they've not come from me yet. They've not tried to influence my journalism as opposed to the opinion side. And I'm sure all of you know, but I'll say it. Newspapers have a church-state separation between the journalists who do news and the ones who do opinion. At least they're supposed to. He said, they haven't come from me yet, but the minute they do, I'll quit. And I'm putting everybody on notice, including the paper. If they try to tell me what to do, I'm going to quit. That is a weird dynamic to have in a newsroom. All right, one more thing, then I'm going to bring our guests in. Today, we still don't know who's going to do the Democratic response to the president's address to a joint session of Congress. It's not a State of the Union because the conventions of history, the first speech they do as they enter office, it's not called the State of the Union. But it's going to look like a State of the Union to everybody. Same theatrics and everything else. The Democrats still haven't said who's going to do the response. As you know, it's a very hard thing. Sometimes they do the response from a studio or in Capitol Hill. Sometimes they try to do it back in their district or their state. We don't know who's going to do it for the Democrats. But we learned today is that the progressive parties have picked California Representative Latifah Simon, very close to Vice President Harris, to do their response for what's the Working People's Party, right? Working People's Party. I think I have that right. I confess, I've heard of her, but I thought, well, I don't really know what she sounds like. What's her rhetoric like? So here is a little bit from earlier this year, protesting the Trump administration. California Representative Latifah Simon. Roll tape, please.
I want to be clear that our democracy, and I hope you all agree with me, is on life support. In fact, it is in hospice. I want us to be clear that as Democrats who are coming here and standing in front of you, it is our duty to hold the line. It is our duty to act and not just talk. It is our duty to hold our votes. It is our duty to ensure that this administration doesn't take us back to an America in 1952, an apartheid America. It is important that we hold the line to accuse these folks of the law that they are breaking. We are not colonizers. We are supposed to be a democracy that loves our neighbors. We are supposed to be a democracy that works to heal instead of kill. I gotta tell you one last thing. The Republican Party claims to love a Jesus that loves its neighbor, claims to love a God that blesses its people, to heal the sick, and to take care of the widow, to take care of the child with no mother, no father. We honestly must ask this party to reevaluate its own relationship with God. We will move forward.
All right, so she is a very important voice now in the progressive movement, and we hope to have her on soon. We asked her to be on tonight after she was named to this slot, but we're working on it. So hopefully she'll be here soon. So now to talk about lots of the things that are in the news, Elon Musk, some of these media issues, couldn't be more delighted to have as our guest tonight Eleanor Cliff, who's been here before. Eleanor, welcome back. I'm going to unmute you. Thank you for joining. How are you enjoying the first month of the Trump administration?
I'm watching the numbers go down, and I don't think the country enjoys Elon Musk as much as you do.
Okay, well, I enjoy him as entertainment. I have mixed feelings about his policy. Amber,
right.
Amber Duke of the Daily Caller. Amber, welcome in. I think this is your first time on Two-Way, right?
It is. Thanks for having me.
Well, welcome in. We're glad to have you both. I'd like to start with Musk, and Eleanor, start with you.
Sure.
What's Musk doing that you think is good for the country? And what's Musk doing that he thinks bad for the country?
Well, I think if he brought his intelligence and his AI skills to the job and really was looking for waste, fraud, and abuse and not just trying to find money so they can pay for the huge tax cuts that they're trying to get through the Congress, I'd applaud that. But to invade, and that's kind of the spirit that he brings to this. It's like Silicon Valley, I gather. You go in and you break it, and you apologize later if necessary, but you don't stop what you're doing. To go in with these young people who basically harass and humiliate workers, and then take on this whole narrative that people who work for the federal government are slackers, and they're just occupying space and they're not doing anything worthy. I think the stories are beginning to, I have written about a young woman who worked for the Bureau of Land Management measuring soil and plant to see if you can extend permits for cows that graze on public lands so you don't get E. coli in your salmon. She's located in Idaho where the Salmon River runs right through. And these are important jobs, and she was trained. It cost $3,000 to train her. She got a $5,000 bonus, and they turn around. She's been there 5 months. They fire her. They're going to have to fill that job. If they don't, I think that's another tragedy. And then the losses associated with the USAID programs being shut down. You know, these are real lives that are being lost. It's a global catastrophe. So I'm not for any of that. That doesn't mean I don't think that there are ways to make government work better. I mean, Elon Musk should know how to put all the computer systems together. I mean, the ancient computer systems in the government are a problem. But the notion that he comes with a chainsaw and he's grinning about it, and it's like only he matters and people who are billionaires matter, and all of us other little people, you know, can be trifled with. I think it's a terrible attitude. And I think it's hurting Trump. I mean, I'm not saying his polls are crating or anything like that, but the numbers are negative about Elon Musk. They're negative about the chaos that's being created. And I think if he was smart, he'd yank him back a bit. If we had a pool on who exits this administration first, I'd put Marco Rubio up near the top. I think the body language is telling a lot of his positions and what he's argued for, and he's a serious person. They're counter to what Trump wants. So, you know, this is just beginning. We're only a little more than a month in. So I'm open-minded about some positive things that can happen, but I think the way they've gone about it is just it's mean. It's really mean.
Yeah, he did. Musk today did. He's done it before, but he did today reference the computer systems and the fact that he does want to play a role in trying to modernize them. And I think no one who's ever associated with government as a reporter or a citizen could be against that. I'm sure. Thank you for that, Eleanor. Amber, Eleanor listed a lot of things that trouble her, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be more positive about what Musk is doing than Eleanor was. But start with. What is he doing that bothers you? What is Doge doing that you think is not being done right? And then tell us what you like about it.
Well, I would agree with statements, Mark, that the cabinet secretary should have ultimate control over their agencies, and that includes deciding who gets to work for them, who gets to stay and boot. And so I understand their hesitation with Elon Musk seemingly stepping on their toes and instituting this email test for their workers. Now, in general, do I think the email test is a good idea? Sure. I mean, it's basically proof of life. If you haven't checked your email for 3 months, which apparently 25% of, according to a Government Accountability Office report 2 years ago, then that should be kind of the bare minimum that you can reply to an email within 48 hours and list off 5 kind of general things of what you did in the past week. But I would challenge a few of Eleanor's statements, the first of which the polling shows that the Doge at all. I mean, we had this Harvard-Harris survey that came out this week that showed 76% of Americans agree with cutting government waste, fraud, and abuse. Trump's approval rating, 10 points over water. And then every poll that I've seen about Doge shows that a majority of Americans up in the 60s support that effort. And I think it's because the framing that was set up here by Eleanor is that the government workers are the little people, the USAID funded NGOs are the little people, and how dare the Republicans cut that government spending to institute tax cuts? Well, taxes come from the American people. Is the American taxpayer not the little guy in this scenario who is watching as homeless veterans are freezing on street corners, as single moms are forced to survive on barely a little bit of SNAP benefits, as illegal migrants get free hotels, 4-star hotels in New York City? I mean, is that really who we're not standing up for? We're going to pretend that the government is actually the little guy here and not the American taxpayer?
Eleanor, I'd love you to respond to some of the later points that Amber made.
The American government is about the same size it was 50 years ago, and the American population has ballooned. I think it was from 100 and something million to 300 and something million. And the gap has been made up by the hiring of a lot of contractors. And actually, Republicans were more behind that than Democrats, but that's a shared way that they've caught up with this. And these are contracts that are approved, that they help people. And when we admit people who are seeking asylum in this country, we have a statue in the harbor here. Give me your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. When I was 13, I won an essay contest on what the United Nations means to me. Eleanor Roosevelt was one of the judges. My parents are immigrants. They're on the wall at Ellis Island. This means a lot to me about the heritage of this country and to the way that the immigrants have been smeared, also treated as though every one of them is a potential terrorist, if not an actual terrorist, is a blight on our country. So I would say that in part to what you just said. And if we're going to talk about people who are have jobs that are on the taxpayer dime, I thought the Congresswoman from Georgia who talked about the real people who have real jobs and not living off the taxpayers when in fact she also is paid by the taxpayers. So I think we should, quit comparing, real people and real jobs. But I think people working in government do qualify as little people compared to the billionaire that is basically wrecking a lot of their lives.
Okay. You mentioned immigration. We could go back and forth on these issues, but I want to cover some other stuff and then get folks in. So, Amber, you first. This idea of a gold card, this $5 million entrance fee to get on a path to citizenship, I can't find anything wrong with it. It seems just like it may not work, as the president acknowledged today, but if it works, it could bring a lot of revenue in exchange for bringing very well vetted and very well qualified people into the United States to contribute to our economy and our cultural life in all sorts of ways. Do you see any flaws in this? Anything, assuming the vetting is solid, do you see anything wrong with this idea?
Yeah, I see a couple of problems with it. And I hear the economic argument that this would help potentially pay down the government debt. But I don't think that American citizenship, which is such a prized possession, should be up to the highest bidder. And just because someone has $5 million to spare,
not the highest bidder, just a high bidder.
Very high bidder. And I don't think necessarily that someone having $5 million to burn means that they're going to be necessarily the biggest benefit to our country. And I see this program being abused potentially by wealthy Chinese and Gulf state wealthy people who don't really have an interest in assimilating into American culture, but would rather use this system to be able to gain greater access to the levers of power. We've already seen numerous reports about how the Chinese Communist Party uses wealth tourism through its Chinese citizens, particularly in the American universities, to gain access to sensitive information and send that back to the CCP, stealing American research techniques, state secrets, spying on the American education system, and later on in government. So I have a lot of concerns about that. This is actually one of the programs that Trump has thrown out there that I do not support.
Okay, before Eleanor weighs in, Amber, I credit both of those concerns. I guess I cover them just from my own response to under the rubric of the vetting's got to be solid. In other words, we're not letting unworthy people in. We're letting people who otherwise might be able to get in eventually. And again, the vetting, hopefully we're not letting in anti-American people from China or anywhere else. Eleanor, tell me this is a Donald Trump program you love.
No. When President Trump was asked about it and asked if he would welcome Russian oligarchs, he said yes. They're the best people ever. Do we really want Russian oligarchs here? I mean, Russia is an oligarchy. Putin is enthralled, captured by all of the wealth, and they bought up all of the industries. That's a long story about how that happened in Russia. But is that what we want here? I mean, we have the makings of it. And I know President Biden, everybody likes to beat up on him now that he's out of office. He warned about the oligarchs. And I think that was a statement that he made that now looks quite prescient. I think it's a very dangerous trend.
All right.
If it becomes a trend. And I guess they can do it. They claim they've looked at legal things and
All right, both of you, you've dampened my enthusiasm. I thought this was
Okay.
fantastic, but now I'm thinking,
Sorry, Mark.
I'm just gonna have a bunch of Russian oligarchs and Chinese spies living in my neighborhood now.
Yeah.
But we'll have 10 million bucks to defray the debt. Eleanor, how do you feel about what Jeff Bezos did today? Is this some outrage, or it's his paper and he can have the editorial board policies he wants?
I feel terrible about it. I've been reading the Post a long time. George Will was featured there. I think Max Boot is a prominent conservative voice who's there. It's not just liberals talking to liberals. And a lot of these columnists have followings, and suddenly they're only going to write about personal liberty and free
Well, no,
market.
he said they'd write about other things. It's just they're not going to write editorials that are in conflict with those two core values.
That's even worse. If somebody disagrees with that, I guess I'd like to hear from that as well. I mean, if I wanted to read The Economist, I would subscribe to The Economist.
Well, but let me before we go to Amber, let me just say, right, you and I have grown up reading a Washington Post editorial board that's not the most liberal in the country. And David Shipley, under his stewardship, it's been centrist on some things. They criticize Joe Biden. They've been reflexively liberal, but they're not the Wall Street Journal editorial board. And so what's wrong? I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit because I have complex feelings with this. But what's wrong with the owner of the paper saying, you know what? I don't want my editorial board to write editorials against the free market because I believe in the free market. Is there something intrinsically wrong with that? Take it away from Bezos and the Post.
I haven't noticed.
Shouldn't the owner of a paper be able to say, here's what I want for my ed board?
I haven't noticed a lot of anti-free market writing in the Post anyway. So it feels to me he's creating a false adversary here to begin with. And second of all, I think if a billionaire is going to own the properties, that comes with a cost. No free lunch.
Yeah.
So I guess I accept some of that, but I sure am not anxious to read the reworked editorial page of the Post. And when he said, why do we need the opinions in the Washington Post? You can get that from the internet. I mean, what does he think? The internet writes it and makes it all up? I mean, it is such a disparagement of actual news gathering and thinking and arguing that it's a knife in the heart of the long Washington Post tradition.
Yeah, well, it also is going to do nothing to help morale there, and it's already an organization with horrible morale. Amber, is Musk within his rights to do this? Is there any negative feelings you have about what he did today?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's within his rights to do it. I mean, look, every place I've ever worked that has an ownership has some kind of editorial line that they generally expect the paper to toe. I think that's normal. This is obviously somewhat divorced from what the Washington Post has been known for over the past decade, let's say. It's been pretty overwhelmingly liberal, in my opinion. I mean, even the so-called conservative columnists, I would not consider conservative, like Jennifer Rubin, to name one, who recently left the paper because of the editorial shift. And I would say, too, that the two pillars being things as simple as personal liberty and free markets, that's pretty milquetoast as far as conservative ideas go. I mean, those are things that used to be embraced by liberals anyway. So it's hard for me to drum up a whole lot of outrage on behalf of the Washington Post editorial team.
Okay. That's all good. All right, let's bring folks in if you want to get in the conversation. Thanks to Amber and Eleanor for great answers to all the topics we covered. If you want to get in the conversation, please raise your hand. We'll start to call on folks. And as always, peace, love, and understanding. And tell us where you are and what's on your mind. Ronald, come on in. Unmute. Tell us what's on your mind after you tell us where you are.
First of all, I'm nerding out so hard right now that I'm on a call with Mark. I've been following you since the days when you were doing that show with John, with all due respect, during the crazy 2016 election. So just being live here, it's really cool.
Great to have you on. If I were you, just a piece of advice, I'd be more excited about being on with Eleanor and Amber, but I appreciate your kind words.
Eleanor and Amber, based on this gold card discussion, was really interesting where Mark came in very gung-ho about it, and then you two kind of poo-pooed it and kind of changed his mind a little bit. I thought that was really insightful and an example of what's really unique about this platform that you don't see elsewhere. So for either of you two, do you have a topic where you came in with one perspective, one point of view, and then after doing research on it, you actually changed your mind later on and changed your position on it? Bonus points if the new position was against the party you normally align with, and bonus points if that issue was within either Biden or Trump administration. And for while you think about that answer, Mark, just a side confirmation for you, I guess. I run a social media company, and one of my clients is the CEO of a rare earth minerals company, which is very niche based on, the episode you had 2 days ago or yesterday. And it's like, how does a congressperson even know about rare earth minerals, right? You can get it from a lobbyist, but the lobbyist has like a certain bias towards a position. So like, do you even try to get different perspectives on a subject that you probably know nothing about or even care that much about by yourself?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Ronald, great questions. I'll give the ladies a little bit of time to think about their changed positions because that's a tough one. There's some complicated topics that I know I'm not going to really understand. I don't know how a nuclear reactor works. Rare earth minerals I've read up on. I don't really understand it, but I understand it enough, I think, to understand in terms of the economics of it and as a leverage point in the negotiations. But do I really understand what they do and why they're important? I don't, and I don't know that I can. I'm not that bright. Thank you for that question. Eleanor, what's something you've changed your mind on? And try to go for one with the bonus
you brought
points.
up these rare minerals and that ancient earth or whatever that is all about. I initially had a very reflexive negative attitude about that. I thought, this is like Trump trying to get reparations when the reparations is supposed to go to the victim, not the guy who's sitting in Washington. And I read up on it, and I learned that Zelensky actually was the first one who raised this in the first year of the war, because he saw it as a way to pay for the war. So it's not as outrageous as it initially seemed to me. And but the terms that Trump set forth initially were extremely favorable to Washington, gave much too much power, I think, over this what Ukraine has. So I think if they work that out, and I don't want to look at Zelensky and think he's selling out his country because he has no other choice. So it makes me feel better, as if they are going to get this deal, and that's part of it, that Zelensky understood that from the start, and it was part of the discussions with the Biden White House as well. So that's my answer to your question.
Amber, tell us about some principled flip-flop of yours.
Absolutely. I love this question, by the way, Ronald. I really appreciate it. So my flip-flop is actually on term limits. I used to be a huge supporter of term limits. I now actually support age limits, but not term limits. And I came to this after talking to a really smart friend of mine. His name is Jeremy Carl. And he was making 2 points about term limits, one of which is that the fundamental premise supposes that voters are stupid, right? That they can't vote somebody out who's been there so long because, for what reason, we don't know, that the incumbency is too powerful, that voters aren't able to overcome the fact that someone has been in office before. And I just don't buy that argument that voters are not capable of picking the best elected officials to represent them. Otherwise, you're kind of striking at the heart of American democracy with that presupposition. And then number two, I would say that it actually entrenches power even further in the hands of lobbyists and entrenched government officials, because you are taking out people who have institutional knowledge, putting in people who are only going to be there for 2 or 6 years, and they're going to be relying on lobbyists and government officials to show them the way that Congress works, the way to get bills passed, the right positions to take on issues, greasing the wheels. So I have a lot of concerns about term limits that I think, on their face seem like a great idea, but there's some sort of auspicious problems once you dig a little bit deeper.
2 great answers, Ronald. To agree with Amber, great question. And thank you for joining, and thank you for your nice words, and come back regularly, please. Thank you. All right. Let's go to Tom. Tom, come on in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please.
I'm in Eastern Oregon, and it's fun to be here. I've loved listening to Eleanor for when she was on, was it the McLaughlin group? Do I remember that
Yeah,
correctly?
that was it.
Yeah, and it was those were some spirited conversations in the day, and it's just a real honor to be with all of you. I appreciate you calling on me. Kind of off topic of what we've heard thus far, I'm curious about the whole beginnings of the Gulf of America, and why would it be important to Trump, and why would it be important to the AP to not go along with it? And I just don't understand the dynamic of either party. It's all just makes no sense to me one way or the other.
Tom, that's an awesome question. Eleanor, can you explain either side or both?
I can't answer why it's important to Trump, other than it's in the same category as he'd like to annex Canada and would like to get the Panama Canal back, and also Greenland, by the way. So I think it's part of the, it almost comes under manifest destiny, which is a term that was used for former presidents when presidents kind of just expanded when we added states and all that. I think it's part of his power seeking. Why it matters to the AP, they are a global organization, and there aren't a lot of people who are buying that this is suddenly the Gulf of America. And Mexico is calling it the Gulf of Mexico. Most people do, most maps do, and they don't see any big hurry to convince everyone to go along with Trump. He has just announced this. I don't think he's done anything. I don't know. Do you have to go to map makers, or, it doesn't have the force of law, I don't think. And so Donald Trump would like very much to get some cases to go to the Supreme Court about media obstruction and recalcitrance, or all of that, because the Sullivan case is now decades ago. He would like to restrict press freedom. So taking on the AP is kind of, I think it's a way that he is constructing his path to try to get these issues of press freedom before the Supreme Court. That's my view.
Thank you, Eleanor. Amber, a view on either side, either why it matters to the president or why it matters to the AP?
I'm not sure why it matters to Trump. Part of me thinks it might just be a troll to sort of get this reaction from people. But I would say on the AP side, it does feel like they're being petty. And the reason why it does matter what they call the Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico is because the Associated Press style guide is adopted by virtually every newsroom across the country, just by matter of course. And so if they're going to punt on this one issue, it kind of sends a signal to other media outlets that they're not supposed to comply either. And I think that's really odd that they're sort of making this arbitrary decision on this one point where Google Maps has already changed it, right? He did sign an executive order, I believe, changing the name. Why on this one issue are you going to break with President Trump? And I would say, on the AP style guide, even broader, they've made some really boneheaded decisions in the past 5 years that have led to a lot of lack of clarity among readers, whether it's refusing to use gendered language or refusing to use terms like biological men when referring to men who identify as women. And I just think that they've intentionally sowed confusion. And I always say that the way people think about things stems from the things that they read and the language that they hear people using. So I do think it's important.
Is it a hill worth dying on for the AP though? I just don't understand. Isn't there a principle of going along to get along, to be to fulfill their stated mission of making sure that everybody receives all the news? I really appreciate the AP for that. I just don't know if it's worth.
Yeah, Tom, I think if they had to do it over again, they might decide to do it differently. But having staked the principle on saying we're not going to be told how to change, it'd be very difficult for them to climb down off the hill.
And thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful format. It is, I've told I'm right in the middle. I'm stupid. I'm bright. I'm all over the place. And I try to get my equally stupid and bright people, friends, to come to this. It's a fantastic, fantastic way of getting the news. I appreciate all of you for it.
You're very generous. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. And another great question. We're two for two. Jeremy, don't blow it. Got only good questions so far. Tell folks where you are who don't know and your brilliant question, please.
Yeah, it's too late for that. It's already blown. But
Huh.
thanks. I'm in Lower Westchester County, New York. And I have a question about a different media news story from today. The news that broke today that Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper are coming out with a book in just a couple of months about Joe Biden's mental decline. And I had a lot of people who followed this story closely, especially with the help of your great efforts over the summer, Mark. Alex Thompson is one of the few people who deserves tremendous credit for being on the story well in advance of the debate when it became became temporarily fashionable for the media to to consider and reflect on Biden's incapacity.
Just briefly. They only don't dwell on it briefly.
Yep. And whereas followed Jake Tapper, and while Jake Tapper is very good by CNN standards, I think he is very much not in that category of people who deserve credit. So the question is, do you think that for all I know, the book is only half written yet, given how quickly it's come together. But do you think this book has a good chance of actually reflecting honestly with the role of the media's failures in covering Biden, not just in the immediate period before the debate, but for the several years leading up to that?
Yeah.
Or do you think it's more likely to be reputation laundering?
Brilliant question. Amber, I'm guessing you and I are going to agree more on this than Eleanor, but let's see what happens. Amber, what do you think of that excellent question?
Yeah, I mean, Jake Tapper was complicit in the cover up. There's multiple videos of him from 2020 saying that people who were pointing out Biden's obvious cognitive decline were making fun of his stutter. I mean, he had Laura Trump on his show to talk about it. He cut her off when she said that he looked like he was struggling and accused her of mocking his stutter. She said, I didn't even know he had a stutter. He doesn't look well. And there are multiple tweets that he sent out in the same time frame talking about Biden, defending his critics, basically blasting it as a conspiracy theory. So for 5 years later, for him to sit down with someone who actually was a little bit ahead of the curve, I would say Alex Thompson is a great reporter. He was ahead of most of the mainstream media on this, still a little bit behind from people who were pointing it out in the campaign trail in 2020. But I think it really sullies Alex Thompson's reputation to do this with someone who was part of the cover up. And do I think that Jake Tapper, who has one of the biggest egos in the media industry and crawls into people's DMs whenever he gets the slightest hint of criticism, is going to reflect on his own accountability in this book? No, I do not.
Amber, that was a great answer, I got to say. Eleanor.
Tell me more about Alex Thompson. Who was he?
Yeah, he writes for Axios, and as has been correctly described by both Amber and Jeremy, he was ahead of most reporters who write for such organizations and saying there's cognitive decline and that the White House is covering it up and that they browbeat reporters who have the temerity to mention it.
Right. Now, Amber said 5 years ago. This is kind of more recent, like 2 years ago, or
what's more recent?
Where he was talking about Biden's decline. I think Amber was suggesting it goes back years.
Biden's decline?
When you say Alex Thompson,
I've reported, when Alex Thompson was probably in junior high in 2017, and I don't mean that in a denigrating way, he's just a lot younger than I am. I've reported that in 2017, I saw Joe Biden do an event, a book event, a very friendly interview. And I said to someone after the event, thank goodness his time in public life is over, because he could barely complete a sentence. He lost his train of thought. And that's 2017. So I think
I'll be interested to see if what he reports. I mean, I've felt there's an untold story, but I wouldn't put it back that far. I know Obama didn't really want him to run. I thought it had more to do with the death of the son and age, and the fact that it looked like it was Hillary's moment. So I don't know if that counts in this portrait of his decline. But obviously, the Joe Biden that delivered the State of the Union address in 2023,
Four.
or four,
Yeah.
not the Biden we saw at the debate, and that was a huge shock to
Yeah.
a lot of people. And
Yeah.
Trump is having these rolling press conferences all the time, contrasting his vigor with Biden's inability to do that sort of thing. But Biden was in the tradition of most presidents that jealously guard their public comments, and so I didn't really see that as the red flag that maybe it should have been. And
Yeah.
there, I wonder more about the White House
Right.
press corps. There was one reporter at the White House press corps who I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to get him in trouble, but he's a very good reporter, and he said after the debate that performance that the Biden that press corps saw in the White House every day was closer to that debate performance
Correct.
early.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that kind of woke me up.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
I think
It's
there's some good reporting that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I mean, as somebody who's going to vote Democratic, no matter if he was in an iron lung, I fault Jill Biden. I kept thinking the wife is not going to let him go out and embarrass himself. And so I want to know more about that. So I think this is a good book that's coming out. And I guess he's twinning with Tapper because Tapper's got a platform.
Correct. Jeremy, go ahead, and then I'll say a little bit about this.
Yeah, and I think it's just the most damning part of this whole scandal, and I think that's the right word for it, is that it wasn't that necessarily the deep reporting or sourcing was necessary to see what was going on. And maybe it helped to be more congenitally skeptical of Biden in the first place, as those of us on the right have been for many decades.
Yeah.
But I've got email, I have no sources, but I have emails between myself and a friend of mine who happens to be a liberal reporter from the 2020 campaign season, where earlier that day, a video had been making the rounds of an interview that Biden had done just a few years earlier. And I emailed this to my friend saying, is it just me or is the decline from just a few years ago shocking? And she said, no, it's not just you. I think there was always plenty. It was apparent, and the scandal is that.
Jeremy, I'll repeat some of the things I said in the past and that Amber said. You didn't need secret sources to understand Joe Biden's mental decline. You needed a C-SPAN subscription. And Eleanor's right. You can't look at the State of the Union and say his decline was pronounced every day. But any of us who knows someone who has that kind of decline knows you have good days and bad days. Okay. There's a huge story about the cover up of the White House. And from the promotional material of the book, it seems that's their focus, because those people, Ron Klain and a handful of others, they managed the guy's schedule. They kept him off the phone with members of Congress. They browbeat members of Congress who ever whispered a word about it. They tried to destroy Dean, what's his name from Minnesota? Dean Phillips. There was a massive government engineered cover up that was dangerous to the world. Okay. There's no ambiguity about that. And the book seems to be somewhat about that. There's also, you said scandal. I say the biggest media scandal in American history, because aiding and abetting senior Biden officials were the media. And it's laughable that these organizations that engaged in a broad-based, sustained, significant cover-up, sometimes allowing themselves to be browbeat, but sometimes, I mean, Eleanor talked to a reporter who said, every reporter I talked to said the same thing. We see his decline. They didn't say a word about it. He talked to a dead congresswoman. The country should have come to a standstill. He spoke to a congresswoman who, at an event honoring her death, and he tried to speak to her. Okay. So this scandal, biggest media scandal in American history, that needs to be addressed by all these news organizations who are covering the White House now. They need to own up to what they did, not just institutionally, but the same reporters who tried so hard, motivated by a desire to keep Donald Trump from winning. They're now saying, please let us be in the pool. Please let us cover you. Eleanor, you don't like what I
I
said?
just don't see that as a big conspiracy among reporters.
It
I
is.
really
It
don't.
was.
It
I-
is,
It
That
was.
they were sitting on this and they had this and
They did. They
and-
did.
They did.
Eleanor, you
all
yourself,
their editors, everybody said.
Eleanor,
"We're not gonna
you
do
just
it."
said you talked to
I
a
don't-
reporter who knew this. So you think that reporter was an outlier?
I think that reporter bought into what a lot of people bought into if they knew Joe Biden over the decades, that he was always a gaffe machine. He couldn't follow thoughts through. I don't think they saw it as out of the ordinary. I just don't. If this book
Eleanor, I'm gonna.
reveals that
Yeah.
the press actually colluded about this because they didn't want Donald Trump, that
Well,
that would be a huge surprise.
what Jeremy and I suspect is the book's only going to be about Ron Klain and the Biden people covering it up. It's not going to be about the culpability of the media. And
Okay, well,
maybe we'll
that's
be
fair
wrong.
enough.
Maybe
think-
we'll
I think-
maybe
And
we'll
if
be
I
pleasant.
may,
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Alex Thompson was doing TV hits about this right after the debate, and there were still members of the media. This was a year ago. Still members of the
Who
media
was doing
calling him
Alex
one of
Thompson,
the
the
authors
co-author
of this
book.
Oh,
Yes. He was on TV doing hits about Biden's cognitive decline around the time of the debate, and other media members were attacking him on social media, accusing him
Correct.
of being a conspiracy theorist. This was
Correct.
a year ago. This was not
Correct.
2020, a year
Correct.
ago.
Correct.
There was a cover up.
well,
The Biden people were doing their job. It was, I think, unpatriotic and wrongheaded and dangerous. But their job was to protect Joe Biden and position him to run for election. The
Well-
reporters who covered it up were not doing their
I don't
job.
know enough about all these reporters that you're
Yeah.
referring to sell them out and say it's their fault. I don't
Okay.
see that.
Eleanor, if it wasn't a conspiracy, it was everyone thinking the same thing, which is different but not better.
Yeah. We'll see. And again, maybe the book will surprise me, but I will say I've not seen Jake Tapper on television or social media. He's too busy slipping into Amber's DM to complain about her criticism of him. I've not seen him say,
I hope not.
I've not seen him say, my news organization failed. Not seen him say it. And again, when the president of the United States
If
speaks,
the book leads him to that conclusion, maybe
maybe he's saving it for the book.
I don't know if that
I'm
is-
skeptical. We're over time. We got to stop. So that was all great questions, Jeremy. Thank you for that. Eleanor and Amber, I couldn't have enjoyed you more. You make a dynamic duo. I hope you'll come back together and separately, regularly. And thank you for being on. Okay.
Of course. Thank you,
Thank you
Mark.
both. Have a great night. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time, Sean, Dan, and I, morning meeting, and then I'll be back tomorrow night, same bad time, same bad channel, in 23 hours. We'll see you at 9 a.m. Have a great, great evening.
Okay.